Welcome to Season 2 of Propaganda by the Seed. First of all, I just want to thank everybody who's reached out to us over the last year as we've been doing it. It's been awesome to hear from other radical farmers who are kind of grappling with a lot of the same ideas that we are. And we want to hear more from y'all. So if you dig this podcast, pop us an email, propagandabytheseed@riseup. And as you know, for the first year, we kept this podcast on the Soulcast feed, my other podcast. And after doing it, we've decided it's much better now to build up our own infrastructure so that we can keep pushing this project and do more with it. The way we're doing that is we're using Patreon. If you don't know what Patreon is, it is a style of crowdsourcing that allows you to make monthly micropayments. It helps cover bills and helps us continue to build out more and more infrastructure for this project and allows us to devote more time to it. So if you like what we've done in the first season and you want to continue to support, you can go to patreon.com/propaganda by the seed, and you can sign up at the $1, $5, $15, whatever level you feel comfortable with. And anyone who signs up at the $5 or more level will get a complimentary package of seeds from Edgewood Nursery. Thank you, Edgewood Nursery. And now the podcast is going to be on Spotify, Apple, all those places. So again, if you really dug season 1, like, we had a blast doing this podcast and we want to just keep doing it. But if you enjoyed season 1, please hop over to the Apple and review this new feed, Propaganda by the Seed, in Apple Podcasts, so that it shows up. It's really important for a new podcast to get positive reviews, whether you listen on Spotify, Stitcher, whatever. And tell your friends. We got lots of cool stuff lined up for this year. And for this first episode, we're talking to Ben Falk, the author of the Resilient Homestead. Just personally, this book was a big influence on me, and it's awesome to get to talk to him, mostly about Seaberries. And this podcast is also a proud member of the Channel Zero Podcast Network, the Channel Zero Anarchist Podcast Network. And so before we get into this interview with Ben, let's hear from some homies in the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
You're listening to a Channel Zero Network podcast. The Channel Zero Network is a decentralized network of anarchist podcasts bringing you analysis of current events, media criticism, rebellious music, interviews with academics and authors, how-tos, and so much more.
This is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia.
Hello, and welcome to Live Like the World is Dying, your podcast for what feels like the end times. I'm your host, Margaret Killjoy.
What's up, y'all? I'm Pearson, host of Coffee with Comrades.
You've been listening to Rebel Steps. I'm your host, Liz. Believe in yourself, trust one another, and get organized.
Hello, this is Linda. You're listening to Subversion 1312 on the Channel Zero Network.
Whether you are anarcho-curious or a hardened militant, CZN's ever-growing roster of programs has something for you. Head over to channelzeronetwork.com to find out more.
Ben Falk, what the Falk is up? Welcome to the Propaganda by the Seed.
Good to be here.
Oh shit! How's it going over there on your side of the coup?
Oh, it's good. I'm just hanging out with my family and had a little field ski today with my son, and it's sunny, which is pretty unusual this time of year, and there's snow cover, so yeah, we're happy.
Yeah, it's fun. It's beautiful right now. It's I don't know. It's going to be sunny all week down here. I don't know if we have the same weather.
Yeah, the forecast we've had a very sunny winter so far, and it looks like it's going to stay nice, which is amazing because it's usually really dark. This is the darkest time of year, both cloud-wise and day length, and at least we're getting some real sun.
Well, Thank you, Exxon.
It certainly makes it more pleasant to be outside.
Oh yeah, get the goodness of the sun for sure. Yeah,
we're going to the beach tomorrow, so fuck it.
Cool.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. You know, I'm a big fan of your book. I really enjoyed it, The Resilient Homestead. It I don't know, when I was like first getting into all this shit and really nerding out, I really appreciated, like, I don't know, like you go deep on a lot of stuff, but also like, you know, stress like simplicity of, you know, don't do too much shit, just like focus on stuff that stores. And I don't know, there's just a lot of great stuff in that book. So thanks for writing it.
Yeah, no worries.
You working on any new books or any?
Yeah, I'm probably going to do a revision of the existing book. Actually, I've been wanting to do it I've had enough material to do it for a few years to do like a 25-30% addition / change. But I just haven't wanted to put the computer time in, and now I still don't want to, but I think it's justified to. So I'm going to do that probably between now and April if I work things out with the publisher, maybe late April, which if I don't finish by then, I'm not going to do it in the summer. I'm not going to look at my computer much in the summer. So I think I'm just going to bang it out. There's a lot on greenhouses and tools and management where the existing book is just on design and some reports of how things had been going, 10 plus years in, but now there's a lot more on management and maintenance. It's one thing to set these systems up. It's another to live with them year to year. And, you can do anything you want for a few years if you have enough time and energy, but that doesn't mean it makes sense.
But I thought all you had to do was plant some perennials and put a hammock up and just reap the bounty.
Right. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's so funny. That idea is so perennial. The designer's the one in the recliner. I don't know if Mollison really said that. Maybe he did, but it doesn't make much sense to me. Someone still has to get the food in and store it, even if it's falling off the trees.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Is there so when obviously I don't want to spoil stuff in your book, but with the greenhouse stuff, are you looking at like climate battery stuff or passive?
Really just two types of greenhouses that we've built and lived with since the book came out, like a nice sunken in the ground glass house, like 3 feet in the ground, not like a full-on wallopini or whatever ideas, which I think don't make a lot of sense in this climate. But and that's like quite an investment to do a greenhouse like that. And then a much cheaper greenhouse, which is like a bow frame greenhouse, which actually comes out of Maine, as far as I can understand. It's like an upside down boat bent wood frame, which you can build for $200. And that I've lived with now for 3 years, and I really, really like it. I think it's very accessible. So kind of just writing about those two, comparing, contrasting them. Talking about maybe at length having a greenhouse against your home, because that's still such an idea, but I don't think it really works as in actuality very well in this part of the world. Talking about that a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing as what some people call light arch truss. And yeah, that's what I have, and it definitely has a lot of advantages as far as like easy to put up, cheap to build. You can use local materials for the frame, but there's the sunken glass house also. Kind of a higher performance, I would imagine.
Yeah, it really doesn't. It really doesn't get that cold. For like stratifying tree seed and as a nursery infrastructure, I really like the glass house concrete foundation, like proper foundation in the ground. you can really, and that's attached to a greenhouse, root cellar at our original spot. And that's an awesome thing, like rodent free. I mean, you can kind of do anything in there. If you build it right. We had to add 1/4-inch hardware cloth because they eventually got right through the foam walls on the north side. But any hoop house, polyfilm house is, eventually you're going to have rodents just passing in and out. And so then you can't really do much you can't put tree seed in there. That's for sure.
Yeah. Rodents are a perennial, problem.
Yeah. They're really a major challenge to growing, hundreds or thousands of trees and storing nuts and I mean, you can keep them at your house pretty well, I feel like, depending on your house. But as far as dealing with them in greenhouses or root cellars, it's it can be a big problem. Since the book was written, I have a cat now, and it doesn't keep the problem fully at bay. But I'll have more on tree seed nut propagation too in the revision, just because I had done some at that point, but our walnuts that we planted in year 1 had started to bear like right when the book was coming to press, or just after. And then since that time, they've bared every year, and we've been saving them and propagating with those. So it's like a second generation essentially of walnut seed. And so that's not too much in the book, but it should be. No, it's black walnut, North American black walnut, Eastern black walnut, I guess they call them, Juglans, Niagara, the, quote unquote native walnut to the Northeast. I think they're the biggest opportunity in nut trees for like zone 4 around here. Could be wrong over time, but I can't think of anything that thrives as much here. I mean, we have a lot of other stuff. We have hickories in the ground. We have chestnuts, but I think those all have their problems compared to walnuts. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Eastern black. I grew up in Western New York where they're just a weed tree. They thrive there. I mean, they're people really don't like them. They really, quote unquote, take over fields. They're like for us, we only have like poplar and birch that behaves the way black walnuts behave in Western New York. And, so they're very vigorous. They bear every year pretty much, it seems now, and they'll get huge. I mean, they have allelopathy, so you can't just grow whatever around them, but that's not a big problem. And, top quality food source, pretty easy, very easy to store, pretty easy to process, and stores better than basically any food. In the shell, they still taste fresh in 2 years, and high nutrient, profile. So I think they're really, in a lot of ways, as a human food, more valuable than chestnuts. And up here in the mountains in New England, I think chestnuts, I don't think the American chestnut really was in this range. The range maps don't show them here, and I don't think they were here. They were down in the Champlain Valley and certainly down in the Connecticut River Valley further south. But the snow and ice really rips on them pretty hard, especially the Europe, Mollissima, the Chinese variety. I've seen them pretty old, like a couple decades in, and they're just kind of anything that's that open growth form without a strong central leader is pretty vulnerable in like snow country, I feel like, and they get ripped apart pretty good. Like big branches getting ripped off. And so that seems like they look pretty haggard, at the least in the site I saw them in Plainfield, Vermont. Not the easiest site for sure, but I kind of seen that behavior of them. So, and then American, obviously, maybe the growth form is better, but they can't just necessarily live forever around here.
What are your thoughts on processing black walnuts? What kind of tools do you use to do that?
Basically a Rubbermaid bin and a hose with good pressure, bit of a pressure washer could be nice, but I don't use that. Like a sprayer with like a jet, like a, watering gun, and let the hulls just basically soften and like rot off, and then just dump them from one bin to another. Like milk crates can help because all the water goes through, and just be spraying off all the hulls, washing them all away, and then you're left with the seed, the nice hard seed, and then just dry them out in the sun or the shade, but dry them really well, few days, and then just store them in buckets or onion sacks, even better, but buckets work fine, where you'd store squash or onions and garlic, just like a cool mudroom, cool attic. Won't let them freeze, but I mean, you could even store them in your kitchen cabinets. I think they're just really stable. I mean, I think cool dry is gonna be best, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I've heard if you leave the hulls on for a long time, the walnut meat doesn't taste as good. I haven't really experienced that, although it makes sense. Stuff that I'm propagating, I'll just throw literally in a garbage bag or a bucket with some moist sawdust over it and let them just get gnarly in there, like a black goop basically is what they come out as in the spring. And they still will propagate. They're totally viable. It's not like that kills them or anything. I try to keep them from freezing if I'm going to propagate them, but I haven't always been successful with that, and they still are very viable. Then last year, I had them freeze maybe kind of hard, and I had pretty low germination, although some still did it fine, like dozens. But, root cellar storage for the winter for the propagation ones. Yeah.
And then as far as like cracking them and getting the nut meat out?
Yeah, right. A master cracker is really what you want for that.
Okay,
The guy in Missouri who makes one, is beautiful machine, and yeah, it's my 3-year-old knows how to use it pretty good, and it's you're not going to have like a mountain of walnut meat stacked up in a minute, but it's so dense and such a good food, that powerful food, you don't need that much. It's a pretty reasonable addition, like nutrient addition to your diet.
So you making like walnut burgers or any crazy?
No, we just eat them. We really haven't got into processing a nut. Like we eat them as we crack them. We never piling up any nut meat. So we just crack and eat like immediately. So I haven't experimented, with making stuff with the nuts themselves.
Sorry, I just exposed myself as a vegan in this conversation, so that's a very vegan question. Oh God! But yeah, so I'm always obsessed with protein sources and shit, and so it's
right.
So
right.
I'm all about hazelnuts and chestnuts, and so it's interesting. It kind of like that's why we love doing this podcast, because somebody always throws you a curveball, and it's like, oh shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you had 2 to 4 walnuts in your yard, I think that's all the nuts you could possibly want in your diet. But down in Maine, where you are in Maine, you probably could find enough around, to just go wild forage them. Here, we're especially excited about it because they're just not here. Like if you see a walnut in the mountains of Vermont, someone planted it or planted its immediate parent. But, you go outside of that zone in more like temperate New England or the mid-Atlantic, Western New York, there's millions and millions of walnuts.
Yeah. Well, the main reason we got in touch with you was we wanted to talk about Seaberries. Yeah, I don't know. Are you still excited about Seaberries?
Yeah, I am. It's one of the things I'm still excited about, for sure. Maybe a little less in terms of how reliable. I've had a couple bad years of the fruit bearing, and they're tricky. They're really not easy. But I'm still super excited about the yield, about the fruit itself, and about also having it in a system.
So, to those who don't know, like, I feel like what I learned, maybe I learned this in your book, I'm not sure, but seaberries were used in the Soviet Union as like a replacement for orange juice. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, the Germans talk about that a lot with, like, in World War II, they had seaberry instead of orange juice. And you're going to get a lot more vitamin C out of seaberry than oranges, that's for sure.
Wow.
Many times, like 10, 20, 30. Well, I think it's more like 20 plus times the vitamin C per unit, which you're not going to use as much seaberry as oranges, but you also don't need to. Plus a whole lot of other nutrients that definitely aren't in oranges, like essential fats, omega-7. It's like 10+% fat.
Wow.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's like not a thing with anything on a plant up here, besides nuts.
Well, can I ask you, like, it's in the same family as gomi and, I call them autumn berries because of my son, but autumn olives.
Yeah.
Are these more nutritious than those plants?
Well, they're all real nutritious. I mean, gomi, Elaeagnus has a lot of the lycopene, which is unusual and important nutrient. A lot of vitamins, minerals. I think it's hard to beat seaberry in that it has like that's omega-7 loaded with essential fats, multiple fatty acids, plus a lot of A, E, and C. So yeah, I mean, you can't really say one's better than the other. You need everything, but it's pretty unparalleled. What's in a seaberry, at least in this climate.
So, can you talk about like the kinds of how you can set seaberries up for success? Like what are the like best ways to grow them? Mm-hmm. Like, do they grow good in a row? Is it I feel like on your farm you had them in a row, maybe? Yeah.
Well, we've done both. I would grow them in rows, and that is how we mostly grow them. Well, pretty much almost always. You could do more of a mosaic pattern, but mosaic patterns in general are just going to be so much harder to manage than if you have lines of things and you can like mow or walk inside or, set up a fence and graze it. So, doesn't really matter. I don't think the seaberries prefer one or the other, but for management, you want to give it some love in the first few years. I don't think they're that aggressive as people tend to think they are early on. Nor do I think they're drought tolerant per se at all, which a lot of people say they are. And they plant them when wind breaks in Saskatchewan, where there's a lot of drought and drying winds. I don't know what variety they have, or species, but I find they actually really like a lot of moisture, as long as they're not, in a truly wet spot. They're not wetland hardy. But I mean, neither are elderberry even, and people think elderberry like it really wet. I find that's not a wetland plant. It'll take it more wet than seaberry, and same current will as well. But and they don't care. But they don't care about certain difficult challenges like clay. I have them in a pond berm, intentionally compacted material. They thrive on that, and they thrive in a lot of different situations. I have them in. And not in some others. And one of the commonalities is they want a bit of moisture. And they definitely need full sun. They're not shade tolerant at all.
Wow, so if I have a bunch of clay around a pond, that's a decent place to put some seaberries.
Yeah, I think if they can access water, but they're not in it, on mounds and wet spots, I mean, almost everything really rages it in those situations, I found. But, seaberry can take hardcore clay. I don't think they like sandy soil as much unless they have a lot of water access, but that's not something you usually have when you're in a sandy situation.
So for you, how long do they usually take before producing fruit from growing them from seed?
From seed, probably year 4 mostly is going to be somewhere in there. If you treat them well, you definitely want to feed them. Mulch them in the beginning, give them 2-3 years, get them up to chest height with some care like you would a fruit tree, and don't treat them like, they're not a black locust or a willow or an alder. They do need to be brought along there in the beginning. If you can keep the grass down, all the better. I think you'll get fruit more like in year 3 or 4 versus it could take more like 5 or 6 if you're kind of not giving them a lot of love.
And, this is a plant that requires male and female plants. And so, like, what do you do? Do you, like, figure, like that's what happens if you get all males or something?
Well, that's the problem. So that's a big problem of growing from seed is you won't know the sex until, like, year 3, 4, 5. So that kind of sucks because, what do you grow 50 plants in pots and have them in big pots until you realize which ones you actually want to put in the ground, or you put them in the ground and you got to thin 2/3 of them and try to fill in the holes. So that's where cuttings and grafting or just, rooting cuttings, which isn't that easy to do, growing clones is really helpful. But that being said, like, seedling varieties are awesome to eat, clip branches and freeze and harvest that way. They're not as pickable, but they're definitely as nutrient dense, I think. They might even be a little more. They're thornier, usually, it seems, and they're much smaller. But that doesn't mean you can't get still a lot of fruit in the cluster, of a branch. But, yeah, the male and female piece is a challenge, big time. And that's also why a lot of people don't succeed with them is, the males tend to die. That's the other thing. They're not as vigorous. So a lot of people run short on males. I would plant 2 males for every 6 females, even though you really only need 1 because you might lose one. Or have an extra male, like, little planting on hand because that you can pull from. Other pieces, well, there's so many things about Seaberry, and I'm not going to talk about all of it, but one of the tricks is the easiest way to get new plants is to get root shoots that sprout up and dig those up. So, you got a plant, shoots up new plants 2, 4, 5 feet away, 8, 10 feet away sometimes. If you know what plant it came from, just dig that up. You got a new plant immediately and plant it or pot it. That's the easiest way to propagate them. But the males don't tend to do that. It's another problem. So, like, running out of males is pretty much what is going to happen to most people, is they're going to not have enough male representation.
So, if someone wanted to do a large planting of Seaberries, would you suggest that they, or large, I don't know, like 20, 30, I don't know, a bunch of plants. Would you suggest they get a couple a handful of sexed plants and then propagate them out from those ones?
Yeah, well, it depends if they can buy all, like, awesome, Northwoods, One Green World plants right off the bat, great, but, that's expensive.
Right.
If they want to spend a lot less money, yeah, growing from seed is, essentially free. But, yeah, you got to have the time and room to then suss out who's who. I'd grow them in a row. I'd field grow them and then transplant them to the final spot when I knew, okay, here's the sexes of them, and I would do 1 male for every 4 to 5, 6 females. That's another thing is that you get way more fruit off a plant that is next to the male than you do that's like 3 plants away from a male. The pollen is wind pollinated, but it doesn't seem very even a lot of times. So you could get, 2 or 3 times as much fruit from one female than you can sometimes from another, based on its distance to the male. So then all of a sudden it makes it look attractive to have a lot more males, like that you might have a lot more fruit even if you're giving up more spaces to the males. Versus
wow.
Yeah.
Would you expect better pollination if you grew them in like a block rather than a really linear row? So, like, let's say you have
yes, yeah.
If you planted in like a 3x3 block.
Yeah, you want to stagger the males from row to row.
Yeah.
Grow them like, the way they recommend growing corn. You're not going to grow corn in one long row, one long line. Better to break, instead of 100-foot row, do 4 25-foot rows or something. So, yeah, I would say the same, wind pollinated protocol. can't say I've seen the difference from that. I don't think the pollen tends to travel too far. I mean, which is a problem. I mean, I'll even see the best, like most loaded branches be like where one male like branch kind of comes into the female branch and into the female plant. It's like there's a male wand of pollen just like in the female, and then like those branches will be like really worthwhile to harvest. Because the thing is, if they're not loaded, it's not a very worthwhile harvest. Like if they're kind of just a little bit of seaberries on the plant, it can be kind of tedious to even go for them. So you want them to be heavy, like laden. I'd rather have one super loaded seaberry than 30 of them barely, that are kind of light or even more. I mean, it kind of makes it not worth it time wise to get the seaberry off, especially if you're cutting and freezing. If you're cutting and freezing branches and then, knocking them off, which is totally the way to go if you have enough plants. You can hand pick. I mean, some varieties are pretty good for hand picking. You could pick a quart every 20 minutes once you get really good. But, it's not like picking blueberries or raspberries or something, or currants.
Yeah. Have you experimented with any sort of artificial help for that pollination issue, like using a leaf blower or something?
No, I have cut male branches and thrown them into female plants, during flowering, just toss them in the plant and that didn't seem to work too well.
Bummer.
Where if there's like a raging male that's not near any females, just kind of somehow off by itself, do that. But the males just don't thrive. You won't necessarily have like a super wandy, big, full male. Like that's hard to do. You got to treat that plant really well to kind of get it there. Definitely give more care to your males.
Coddle them. It's 2021. Coddle the males.
I made that exact mistake where I was like, the male just needs to make pollen. That's not that hard.
Right.
And then I wound up with female plants that were blooming like years ahead of the males.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to happen. I had that for years, and finally I went way out of my way and just went hardcore trying to do male promotion. And finally, now I have a bunch of rows, 150, 200-foot rows, 5 of them, and there's a male every 5th plant, and, and hundreds of plants. But that took a lot of work to get there.
I mean, is there anything particular you recommend to like take care of these fragile males?
Well, just I think just what I said before, like mulch those more, give them more nitrogen, basically, treat them better, like you would any fruit tree, but just more food and less competition.
What do you think? Partial shade, full sun? How? What do you think is like the best growing conditions as far as sunlight?
Well, they can't. Full sun. Yeah, sorry, I thought I said that before. Totally full sun. They can't tolerate much shade at all.
Yeah, it seems like the adverse conditions that do not bother them at all are salt and soil compaction.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a seaberry put shoots up through 4 inches of asphalt, and
cool.
It just was like totally happy to grow in this compacted gravel and then push right through asphalt. And it's like, wow, that is really impressive.
Yeah, they're definitely really vigorous in some fronts, and then on some fronts they're not. Yeah.
Just an aside, I actually had a chocolate bar recently that was a Seaberry chocolate bar that I got here in Maine. And I was like, what the fuck?
Really? I haven't seen that one. That's cool.
Yeah, it was at some, some hipster market.
Uh-huh.
Did it have like dried fruit in it?
Yeah, it had. I don't know. It was. It just had seaberries in it, and it didn't have like chunks or anything. It just had like a slightly chocolatey sour taste. It was like dark chocolate with sea berries, but I don't think there was a lot of sea berries, but just seeing it as an ingredient at all, it just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I mean, one thing that is worth mentioning is that it's like what got me really pumped about sea berries when I first started reading about them was just how pretty they are, and especially like, bright orange, and you can't grow a lot of stuff that looks like that.
Right.
So it's a really unique looking. I don't know. They look kind of tropical to me.
Yeah, definitely. They're unusual. People sometimes think they're olives when they see them, but they're actually in Italy. I've checked them out. I visited like a place that's growing like 40 hectares of them in Tuscany, and they call them Olivello spinoso, which is like little olive with spines, is literally what it translates at. And that's kind of what they think of them as. They're a little olive with spines, even though they're no more related to an olive than they are to a coconut. Well, maybe a little more than that, because coconuts aren't even trees, but they're grasses. But like, yeah, they're not very related.
Yeah, they just happen to have silvery leaves.
Right. Yeah, they're Elaeagnaceae, and they're not related per se to buckthorn, because people call them sea buckthorn, which I don't really like that term because everyone hates buckthorn, and they're not like buckthorn. I think is rhamnus, a totally different genus anyway, and I think family too.
Yeah, the buckthorn is rhamnus, and that's why the botanical name of Seaberry is Hippophae rhamnoides. Oides means looks like, so it looks like rhamnus.
Right. Interesting.
So I saw on YouTube that you were making this like this really cool drink from sea berries. It's kind of like, I don't know, what, juice basically. Do you like, you store a lot of them? Like, what if you have whatever 400-foot rows? That's how much fruit are you getting out of that? Like, what do you do with it all?
Well, we've never had a great year in this larger planting. When we do, if and when we do, there'll be, some hundreds of pounds of fruit. But, for now, we just freeze them. We do some pick your own, where pick 2 pints, leave us a pint. We don't really want to, per se, focus on turning them into money. Because it's hard to have too much Seaberry. I give them to relatives who are really kind of have some, challenges health-wise or whatever. So we freeze them in plastic, Ziploc bags, and then we turn them into Seaberry oxymel, usually just throughout the winter when we thaw them.
Oh, wow.
You can make oxymel, right then in the harvest season, but everyone's busy then.
So, I'm not 100% like oxymel is like is it honey or vinegar, or it's kind of like fire cider?
It's yeah, kind of. I mean, it's honey and vinegar. I think it's any fruit juice mixed with honey and vinegar to some extent is, I think, an oxymel, but it's more honey than vinegar for sure. And
so that's like your elderberry juice for.
Yeah, it's a great tonic. Yeah, it's really awesome. And then we'll freeze that too. It will stay in the fridge for weeks, but not months upon months without fermenting a little, which is also fine. Yeah, but it's raw, none of that's heated. It's all in a blender. I have some YouTube videos showing it pretty well. It's a very easy process. And you get a lot of seed out of it too, which I think are great, great to grow a lot more.
I've definitely heard of Seaberry being potentially invasive, more up in Canada, it seems like. But I was curious if you've had any issues with or even seen any like volunteer seedlings. And are birds an issue at all?
No, that's one amazing thing about them. I haven't, just like black currants, I haven't seen any pressure on them, by any wildlife.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, that could change, but so far it hasn't. There's been none.
That's pretty amazing. And how long have you been growing them?
Maybe getting on, I've been growing them for pushing 13 years or so, but I mean, they've been bearing now. I've been like harvesting them and having fruit pretty much every year for, I don't know, more than 10 years.
Cool.
So yeah, I gotta see, if birds, usually birds discover everything by like year 5 is what I've found.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a bunch of Seaberries that I thought I successfully propagated from cuttings, but now I'm like, I don't even know if there are male or females that I propagated it from, so I guess I don't know. But you're saying cuttings doesn't work, or like to root them from cuttings?
Cuttings should work.
No, cuttings work, but they're not that easy.
Okay. And
I mean, I've had great success sometimes, and then sometimes not a lot, and I feel like timing is a lot.
All right, here's one more question about Seaberries. I have a friend who told me that you can actually graft male branches onto female plants. Is that something you've done, or is that you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I've grafted, males onto females, females onto males, and it works, but I don't know how it holds up over many years. It might not. I've had them bear. I've had I've turned males into females, basically, and had a lot of fruit on them for a number of years. And then I've also seen some of those die back, so I got to wonder in the long run. But here's the big thing with Seaberries. I think they're not long-lived plants at all, and they do die back, and you're going to only get, honestly, less than 10 years of really good productivity out of a plant, maybe even way less than that, maybe like a handful, and that it's all about pruning and rejuvenation and even promoting thickets and actually having like new shoots growing up into new plants and cutting back the old one and like doing like heavy prunings throughout. That's kind of the leading edge of where I'm at with it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's like maintaining it over decades, and like what's that the life cycle. I don't think they're that's just the kind of plant they are, like a plum. They're like pretty quick, pretty precocious, and I just don't think the single individuals last a long time, but the whole thicket could.
That makes a lot of sense with their heavy suckering habit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Gets me psyched to plant more, but now I'm not sure how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, you might want to put them in a place you can let them get a little wild and thick it out, and not just be like, here, I'm growing this one plant, and that's like where it's always going to be, right there,
Right, and then just move them.
But that's a management challenge. Like in a lot of people's yards, like they can't really deal with that. Like they want to plant, they want it to stay right in that spot. They want the mulching always there. It's not like, oh, this thing's just going to move and create a thicket over the years.
Yeah, it reminds me of how this guy we were talking to recently described like hazelnuts, just cutting them down and letting them coppice or whatever. Well, what about rice? Is that still something that is part of your homesteading practices?
No, it hasn't been some time. We gave it like a handful of years, and it was a nice experiment, but we didn't keep pushing on it.
What was it that made you stop doing it?
Birds, wetland weeds, and the need to transplant every plant, because it's long season, and our frost-free season is just not that long.
And those were regular, like, regular kind. It wasn't like upland rice, right? You were growing like traditional.
Yeah, it was, brown, Ariza, sativa, Japanese brown rice. They're all brown. White's just what's polished, but yeah, just Japanese short grain rice. It was paddy rice, Hayayuki, and a few other varieties. But you definitely likes it wet. I mean, you could grow it and not flood it, but you don't get less yields, lower yields.
Cool. Well, that's that's disappointing, but it's good to know, when shit's not.
I mean, it's an energy input thing, like if I really wanted to, I'd just keep growing them and I'd have to net them to keep birds out. And I did after a while, but I don't like netting. I'm kind of morally opposed to netting to some extent. It's just, I hate dealing with it. It has a lot of collateral damage, amphibian getting caught in it and dying. And just, it's just gnarly to put out netting, out in the landscape kind of to some extent. And it's like, feels very disposable. So I'm not into it. But if I really was focused on growing rice, I still think I could grow rice and get a lot of rice every year, most years. But just compared to growing potatoes for like another calorie storage, it's just a lot easier to do the potatoes. Not that they're one for one. I mean, rice stores a lot better than potatoes, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things I like about your book is how it's like trying to refine, looking at the inputs, what's gonna give you the most bang for your buck: cabbage, shiitake, mushrooms, squash.
Right.
Are there any other mushrooms other than shiitake that you are growing a lot of these days that you're excited about?
No, we're really we don't even grow mushrooms anymore either. We just wild forage for them. But, we had some success with oysters. I think shiitake is probably the way to go, though, as far as I know. I'm not by any means, haven't done a deep dive on mushroom growing. I spent some time growing shiitake and oyster. I think growing cold strains, the cold weather strains of shiitake that you don't have to soak, and throwing them in zone 1 so you can keep an eye on them is probably the lowest hanging fruit for just getting your own mushrooms, gardening your own mushrooms. But, aside from winecap stropharia, which we've grown lots of, but they pose their own problems. I mean, they're very perishable. But they're nice to eat. But, yeah, again, it's just an input.
The bugs also seem to enjoy wine caps.
Oh, yeah. They're so perishable. I mean, you have like hours on those things sometimes.
Yeah.
So they're kind of tough in that way.
That's too bad. Yeah, the slugs and I don't know, there's some weird beetles that like our shiitakes, but we still get a lot. Well, I feel like there was somebody out here growing rice, and they also gave up. So I'm not even gonna bother again. So it's thanks for saving the time.
Well, that's what that's why I try. I want to try everything, but it's the other thing. It's going to go in my new book revision as a disclaimer that just because it's in there doesn't mean you're supposed to do it. Just because I tried it doesn't mean it's something that you should do. I mean, I'm trying things to see how worthwhile they are, and that's also specific to my own goals, land, microclimate, the way I want to spend my time, et cetera, et cetera. So doesn't mean just because it's not worth it for me that it's, wouldn't be worth it for someone else. And it doesn't mean just because I called it out of my system and said that's not worth it, doesn't mean it's not worth it for someone else, So it's all very, I'm trying to present, well, here's some factors to it. And then if it still seems attractive, then, give it a go. But yeah, I get a lot of clients are like, well, we got to have our rice paddies. Where should those go? I'm like, why do you decide you want to grow rice? You know, just because in my book isn't a good reason. You know, I mean, like, you need some reasons. So
yeah, you gotta love it. You gotta be all about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's you're gonna put more time into it than growing other potential replacements for sure.
And, you know, plus a 30-pound bag of rice is, you know, pretty cheap. So
right now, you just can't justify economically. It's probably the most expensive. It's like making maple syrup. Even though maple syrup is actually quite expensive, I'm not paying myself well when I'm making maple syrup. I just do it for fun. Whereas growing squash, even though squash isn't very expensive, I figured I was paying myself $25 an hour one year to grow squash because I just spent almost no time doing it. You know, and grew 100 whatever pounds, you know. So it actually would have cost a lot of money to buy that much squash, even though it's like $2 a pound or whatever it is, or less.
That's awesome. So your main source of income still from like doing consultations and
design work, land planning, our design business, and and consulting. Yeah, that's still what I do for money. It's definitely not growing stuff. But I do sell plants. I grow Seaberries and sell them, and I grow honey. I've been doing a lot with bees since my book. There'll probably be a chapter on bees, because there's nothing on bees in my book, I don't think, because I was only a couple years in at that point. I didn't have anything to say. I still don't have a whole lot to say. There's more on bees than there is on permaculture, you know, as a whole. Probably more books, probably way more research, for sure. But I'm kind of doing my own take on it, so I'll have something to say about it.
That's awesome. You making mead? Yep,
bunch of mead, bunch of honey, whole comb. You know, we really don't filter any of it. That was something that I, start harvesting frames of honey out of a hive. You're like, wait, I'm going to crush all this up and, take all this value out of it. You know, it's classic. It's like, I don't know. It's not quite as bad, but it's almost like getting skim milk out of a cow. You know, it's not what you want out of a cow. You want butter and whole, heavy cream. So the whole comb is awesome. You know, we only sell it as whole comb. I'll strain some just for use in tea, because you don't want to really put the wax in your tea. It just makes a mess of your cup. But the whole comb is totally that's how we're interested in it.
Well, are you using top bar hives?
No, I've tried that a little bit, but mostly just Langstroth conventional hives, but with a worry top and totally naturally drawn foundation. I'm not putting wax foundation in there.
Yeah.
I think that's a big, probably maybe one of the most key parts of it, is that we're just letting them draw their own foundation. Mm-hmm. Using a tiny wax strip. I was using a little wax strip of bought foundation, but then the more I learn about that foundation, the more I don't want to put it in my hives at all. And so I just dribble some wax in a line, and they build their combs there. You do get some cross combing. You're not going to get all perfect combs. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to make them all perfect for sure, like in straight lines. But mostly, I can sometimes get that.
Well, I don't know. That's pretty much. That's all we got.
Yeah, thanks for calling me up.
Yeah, man, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. And, personally, your work was a big inspiration for me, and awesome to, finally get a chance to talk to you. So
great. Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too, guys. Take care.
Bye.